Hey there, and welcome to History Nest. Tonight, we're heading into something a little darker. Time of plagues, punishment, and pottage. Forget the fantasy of castles and chivalry that Hollywood fed you. We're diving into the gritty reality of life during the Middle Ages. And trust me, you probably wouldn't survive a single day. Before we get started, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, so are the fleas. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress, teeming with bugs and filled with hay that smells exactly like the barn floor it came from 3 months ago. No memory foam, no pillows, definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a scratchy wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter. Now so caked in grime it weighs as much as a small cow. You blink awake to the sound of church bells clanging in the distance. It's the medieval version of an alarm clock, only louder and infinitely more miserable. You live in a single-room wooden hut. No windows, no privacy. It's a delightful, open-concept setup where you, your entire family, a goat, and a swarm of domestic insects all share the same space. The smell, a fragrant symphony of stale beer, sweat, livestock, and something you sincerely hope isn't mold but deep down, you know it is. There are no scented candles. Even if there were, they'd just melt into the dirt floor. You try to stretch, bad idea. The air is freezing, and your joints ache. You're 22 years old, which in the 1300s makes you solidly middle-aged. Your spine creaks like a medieval door hinge, and your knees rattle like someone shaking a bag of rocks. Getting out of bed is a calculated risk. The floor is either wet from the rain that leaked through the thatched roof, or crusty from something the neighbor's chicken did. Either way, your bare feet are now officially part of the local ecosystem. Privacy. What's that? You wake up next to your parents, siblings, and maybe that one cousin who just never left. No curtains, no room dividers, no me time, just everyone, all the time. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you're never truly alone because parasites, rodents, and 8 other humans are always right there with you. And that's just how your day begins. You manage to crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors, congrats. But now nature calls. And it's not a polite invitation. It's a primal scream. Let's talk toilets. Spoiler, there aren't any. Forget seats, flushes, or even the comforting presence of a mildly resentful plunger. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is a wooden bucket behind the house already full, because Uncle Wulfric had a bad night with some turnips. The smell, biblical. You hold your breath, do your business, and then here's the kicker, you toss it into the street. Yes, the street. Ideally, you shout Gardez Lou. First, that's old French for watch out below, but honestly, no one moves fast enough. Streets in medieval towns, open sewers, flowing rivers of human waste, animal droppings, and mysterious liquids that no one wants to identify. If you're lucky and your town has public latrines, congratulations. You now get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an outhouse. Privacy, a myth. Ventilation, a cruel joke. You can make small talk, sure, just try not to inhale too deeply. Toilet paper doesn't exist. People wipe with straw, leaves, moss, rags, or, if they're feeling fancy, a scrap of wool. Sometimes, nothing at all. This might explain why handshakes weren't quite popular yet, and castles. You think it gets better there? Slightly, maybe. You might find a garderobe, a fancy name for a hole in the wall that drops your waist straight into the moat. Brilliant until your enemies climb in through it. Yes, that happened. Whether you're a farmer or a noble, relieving yourself in the Middle Ages is a public, cold, humiliating, and frequently dangerous ordeal. One slip and you're face down in centuries of leftover humanity. And we still haven't even brushed your teeth. But hey, You survived the toilet. You've earned a reward, right? Wrong. This is medieval Europe. Comfort doesn't exist. Breakfast, if you can even call ethot, it is a grim affair. No eggs Benedict, no espresso machines humming to life, no avocado toast. Just a wooden bowl filled with something that looks and smells like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew of whatever was lying around. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a bean or two if you're lucky. It's been bubbling in the same pot for days, even weeks. New stuff just gets dumped in as you go. It's not a recipe. It's a survival experiment. On the side, bread, but not the nice kind. This loaf could deflect arrows, made of rye or barley. Flour bulked up with sawdust, acorns, or other creative ingredients. Wheat, that's for the rich. This bread, it's not sliced eats. Negotiated with S for drinks. Forget juice or oat milk lattes. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer. At 6 a.m. Why? Because the water will kill you. It's full of parasites and filth. So everyone from toddlers to grandmothers starts the day with weak ale. No one's thrilled, but hey, at least it won't give you dysentery right away. Meat. Cheese. Dream on. That's for feast days, or if your feudal lord is feeling particularly generous. Most peasants eat meat maybe a few times a year. Fruit, only when it's in season and not already rotting. Spices, forget it. A pinch of pepper costs more than your entire wardrobe. Salt is so valuable it gets locked up. So you gnaw on gritty bread, sip your barely alcoholic beer, and try not to think about the rat that may have taken a midnight bite from your porridge. Breakfast doesn't energize you, it happens to you. And now, poorly fed and mildly traumatized, it's time to get dressed. Not that it'll help. Your entire wardrobe, one outfit, just one, a coarse wool tunic or linen shift you've worn every day for the past several months, possibly years. There's no such thing as fashion. There's just wear it until it disintegrates or gives you a rash. Underwear, optional. Maybe you've got a linen undergarment, maybe not. Either way, you're trudging through life wrapped in scratchy, sweat-soaked layers, lovingly stitched by someone who definitely didn't understand tailoring. Washing your clothes, a nightmare. No washing machines, no detergent. You'd need to drag water from a well, heat it, scrub your clothes with ashes or lye, then hang them in the sun, which shows up maybe 3 days a year. Shoes, if you own any, they're made from untreated leather and stitched together like a middle school art project. No arch support, no soles. Most people just go barefoot through mud, through dung, across sharp rocks, and through puddles of mystery disease. And that's just your feet. Your skin is constantly under attack. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs are part of the daily cast of characters. Nobles have them, monks have them. Children are basically walking petri dishes. You scratch with spoons, sticks, anything you can find. So next time you romanticize the Middle Ages, remember, before you could even face the day, your life was already a full-blown survival quest. And here at History Nest, we're just getting started. And no one will even bat an eye. Your skin, raw from scratching. Your scalp, a war zone of flea bites and lice trenches. Develop a rash, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone, and no wise village elder telling you it's scabies. You just suffer. If you're lucky enough not to get an infection, congrats. That rash will still be your loyal medieval sidekick for the next 6 months. Now that you're dressed in damp wool and unwashed regret, it's time to flash your morning smile. Except, don't. Because in the Middle Ages, smiling is dangerous. Not emotionally dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no floss, no mouthwash. The entire concept of oral hygiene is as rare as a bath. If you're lucky, maybe you chew on a twig or rinse with wine or vinegar. But mostly, your teeth are out here surviving on their own, and they're not doing well. By your mid-20s, your smile looks like something exhumed from a haunted crypt. Cavities are out of control. Gums, swollen and bleeding. And those aren't food stains, it's decay. There's more rot in your mouth than in a medieval root cellar. Sugar, while not yet everywhere, is creeping in among the wealthy. Imported at absurd prices. It's used for tiny cakes or as a ridiculous flex of wealth. Nobles get to rot their teeth quickly. Peasants, they do it slowly over a lifetime of fermented bread, rock-hard porridge, and chewing through disappointment. Toothaches are constant companions. The type of pain that makes you either pray, drink, or yank it out yourself. And that last one was the actual treatment. Dentists didn't really exist, but barber surgeons did. Yes, the same man who cuts your hair might pull your molar out by firelight with a metal hook. And no anesthesia. An infected tooth. Welcome to Fever Town. With no antibiotics. That infection can turn septic and kill you. Yes, a simple toothache can be your ticket to the afterlife. Socially, there's no relief either. Halitosis is universal. Breath like a dragon's tomb is the default. If you're single, your dating value isn't based on your smile. It's based on how much land you own and whether or not your cow is still alive. In short, your mouth is a medieval battlefield and it's losing. Now that your teeth are throbbing, it's time to get to work. And by work, we mean back-breaking labor with no coffee breaks and no future. There's no office, no desk, no promotions, just survival. If you're like 90% of the population, your job is simple. Work the land and try not to die doing it. You're a peasant, which means the land you work doesn't even belong to you. It belongs to a lord who might not even know your name. You rise with the sun and stop only when it vanishes behind the trees. Your tools, a wooden hoe, a dull sickle, and whatever bones you haven't broken yet. There's no such thing as weekends. 6 days of labor. Sunday off if you're not harvesting, praying, or recovering from gangrene. The work is unrelenting. You plow fields by hand, or with oxen if you're rich or lucky. You dig trenches, sow seeds, weed by hand, and haul water, until your back looks like a bent question mark. No one cares if you're exhausted. No one's asking about your mental health. And if you're a woman, you do all that plus care for children, cook, clean, spin wool, tend livestock, and try not to scream when your husband's lice infestation migrates to your pillow. Children, they start working around age 5. No school, no games, just a tiny rake in the hope that one day they'll grow old enough to die of something other than starvation. If you're not a farmer, maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper. Congratulations, now you get to spend all day with fire, toxic chemicals, or rotting animal guts in unventilated shacks. The pay, just enough to survive. Perks, occasional bleeding, break a bone, too bad, get a fever, drink warm beer, and keep moving. There's no time to stop, because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, someone else takes your place. So you keep digging, keep hauling, keep pretending your body isn't falling apart, because in the Middle Ages, work isn't a job. It's an endurance test you never signed up for. And speaking of endurance, let's talk weather. Because in medieval Europe, the seasons aren't refreshing their punishments from the sky. Let's start with winter. No insulation, no heating, no double-glazed windows. Just thin wooden walls with gaps wide enough to throw a chicken through. Your window is a cloth flap. That's it. You huddle near the hearth if you have one. But firewood is scarce, and gathering it, illegal in some forests. Yes, picking up the wrong stick could literally get you executed. So you bundle up in your one damp tunic, curl into a ball, and wake up with icicles for feet. Frostbite. Not a medical term yet, just called being unlucky. Now, fast forward to summer. You think it's better. Wrong. Your home turns into a medieval sauna. No airflow, no deodorant, no relief. You're sweating through layers you can't take off because modesty matters. And so do sunburns, insect bites, and being judged for exposing a forearm. Flies swarm your unwashed body. Mosquitoes buzz in your ears. Your neighbor's baby screams while someone asterisk, there's no anesthesia, lest you count blacking out from the pain. Surgery? It's done with blades that haven't been cleaned since the last crusade. Tools are heated over open flame not to sterilize them, but to make them look more terrifying. Antibiotics won't exist for another few hundred years. Germ? Theory. Never heard of it. Illness is blamed on bad air or divine punishment for your filthy thoughts. God asthmatic must have been that sinful dream you had. Hope you're ready to confess while vomiting into a bucket. If things get worse, brace yourself for medieval medicine. More leeches, maybe some crushed beetles, and a priest by your bedside mumbling last rites just in case. At this point, the cure is basically death, with extra steps. And if, by some miracle, you survive, everyone assumes God changed his mind. The doctor takes the credit, and the leech gets promoted. Because in the Middle Ages, medicine isn't about healing. It's about surviving the cure. After a long day of labor, lice, and leeches, you finally stagger home to your hovel, stomach growling, dreaming of the one good thing left in life, a warm meal. Bad news. That meal is probably trying to kill you. Let's start with the basics. Food preservation doesn't exist. No fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, and the desperate hope that the cold air keeps things from rotting too quickly. Your meat, if you even have meat, has been hanging for days, covered in flies, soaked in suspect brine, and probably gnawed on by a rat. Bread is your staple, and it's not much better. In lean times, peasants bulk it up with bark, sawdust, and even clay. And if it's rye season, you might score a little bonus. Ergata fungus that causes seizures, hallucinations, and sometimes death. Think of it as LSD meets tetanus, in bread form. Vegetables, only if they're in season. And one is always in season, the humble, haunted turnip. Boiled, mashed, or stewing in the eternal pot of misery known as pottage, which, as you'll recall from earlier, is basically a medieval hot tub for questionable ingredients and family secrets. Fruit, maybe in the fall, but it rots fast. Sugar is a rich man's drug, rare and expensive, hoarded by nobles to show off their blackened teeth. Dairy, a gamble. Milk turns sour in hours. Butter and cheese hold out longer, but come packed with bacteria. Still, you eat it. Because the alternative is chewing your boot. Seasoning, not unless you're royalty. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg are literally worth more than gold. For you, flavor comes from onions, pain, and sadness. Most meals taste like wet burlap, seasoned with regret. And don't think food is just a health risk, it's political. Game animals, property of the Lord. Get caught poaching a rabbit, and you're not just fined, you could be hanged. That's right, your dinner might get you executed. So you sit by the fire, spooning gray sludge into your mouth, hoping it doesn't kill you. Because in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish, it tests you. Now it's evening. You've worked, suffered, and choked down your suspicious stew. Time to relax. Not so fast. Because God is watching. So is the priest. And so is your neighbor Agnes, who absolutely will report you if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of life, is life. The church runs your calendar, your laws, your education, if you're lucky enough to read, and every major life event. Think of it as your eternal landlord, and you're always behind on rent. Your day is ruled by prayer bells, morning, noon, and night. Not to remind you but to shame you, Forget to bow, sin. Eat meat on Friday, sin. Dream about your neighbor's wife, double sin. Hell is not abstract, it's detailed. Priests describe it in cinematic glory, rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, and demons wielding pitchforks like medieval accountants. The plague might scare you, eternal damnation terrifies you. You can't read the Bible yourself. It's in Latina language, reserved for monks, clergy, and that one noble boy who hasn't touched mud. So you depend on the church to interpret it. And if Father says your crops failed because you didn't kneel hard enough, guess what? Better wear out those knees. Tithes, 1/10 of everything you own, are not optional. Wheat, chickens, your last coinage, all goes to the church. Got nothing? You're broke and damned. Holy days are frequent, but they're not for fun. They're for fasting, confessing, and being reminded that joy is suspicious. Questioning the church, that's heresy. Heretics are burned, witches and blasphemers flogged, skeptics silenced one way or another. So you go through the motions. You chant, you bow, and you pray. Your soul earns paradise, assuming the priest likes you. Because in the Middle Ages, God might be merciful, but the church, not so much. And if you think being a medieval peasant was rough, try being a medieval woman. Same filth, same hunger. But now add childbirth, obedience, and near total invisibility. Being a woman in the Middle Ages is like playing life on hard mode with no health potions, no save points, and no respect. From the moment you're born, your future is locked in. Marry young, bear children, obey your husband, and die exhausted. Education, not unless you're nobility, and even then, you're probably headed to a convent. Your intellectual development ends somewhere between churn butter and patch tunic. Marriage happens early, as early as 12. Pregnant by 14. Love has nothing to do with it. Marriage is about land, livestock, and alliances. Your opinion, not requested. Once married, you become your husband's property. Your duties: birth heirs, feed everyone, stay silent, complain too much, and you're labeled a nag, or worse, a witch. And that title comes with complimentary drowning or burning depending on what's trending in town. Childbirth is a death lottery. No prenatal care, no sterile tools, no pain relief. Midwives do their best, but even small complications can mean the end for you, the baby, or both. Some survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive one. And if you do survive, now you're raising a screaming child in a lice-infested hut while nursing, cooking, cleaning, and toiling in the fields. No breaks. You are the break for everyone else. If you're unmarried, you're suspicious. If you're widowed, you're vulnerable. If you're opinionated, you're dangerous. Women who defied expectations, who had herbal knowledge, a sharp tongue, or simply the wrong look on a rainy Tuesday often ended up accused of witchcraft. Even in the church, your place is limited. Nuns live under strict rules. No speech without permission. No movement without consent, and always, always, second to men. So if you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you are expected to endure, to obey, to reproduce, and to suffer quietly, ideally, with a smile. Because even in a time of universal suffering, women were expected to suffer bodeflay, already survived filth, starvation, social injustice, and possibly a goat. But just when you think your day in the Middle Ages can't get any worse, here comes violence. Loud, bloody, and, by medieval standards, often completely acceptable. Let's be clear, the Middle Ages were anything but peaceful. Law and order mostly meant hoping your local lord wasn't in a bad mood. Violence wasn't the exception, it was the environment. It was in the home, the streets, the battlefield, the church, and even at the communal bread oven. Crime was rampant, punishment was brutal, and justice, often more theater than protection. Steal a loaf of bread, and you could lose a hand. Accused of lying, expect your tongue to be pierced. Gossiping too much, meet the scold's bridle, a metal mask locked onto your head, complete with a bar in your mouth. For correction, of course. Now imagine being accused of something serious: heresy, theft, or witchcraft. How did you prove your innocence? Through torture, naturally. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One version: stick your hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals in 3 days without infection, congratulations, you're innocent. If not, well, too bad. Another favorite: being tossed into a river. If you float, you're guilty. If you sink, you're innocent and also dead. It's like a medieval game show, except the prize is survival and the host is rooting against you. And if you're sentenced to death, that's a public spectacle. Executions weren't just legal punishments, they were community entertainment. Hangings, beheadings, burnings. People brought snacks. Think of it as the medieval version of live TV. Domestic violence, entirely normal. Husbands were allowed often, expected to discipline their wives and children. Street fights were part of daily life. Looking at the wrong horse could get you beaten. And war was always brewing: local feuds, land disputes, crusades. Someone was always off to stab someone else in the name of God, honor, or just sheer boredom. In medieval society, violence wasn't a breakdown of order. It was the order. Everyone lived knowing life was fragile, justice was cruel, and your neighbor might bash your head in over a pig. So walk carefully, keep your eyes down, and never trust anyone carrying a club. By now, you've made it through the lice, the leeches, the laundryless misery, and the constant threat of public disability. But here comes the final chapter of most medieval lives: an early and thoroughly unglamorous death. If you're still breathing past the age of 40, you're practically a living legend. People might even call you the Old One, not as a nickname, but as an astonishing statistical anomaly. Let's look at the numbers. The average life expectancy hovered between 30 and 40 years. But that's skewed by shockingly high infant mortality. Nearly half of all children died before the age of 5. One bad winter, one bad meal, or one bad cough, and that was it. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no safety net. If you made it to adulthood, you arrived exhausted. You started working as soon as you could walk, and by 25, your joints creaked like a monastery door. You were probably missing teeth, a finger, and most of your original hope. And for women, childbirth was a death sentence in waiting. No pain relief, no surgical support, just prayer, hot water, and someone holding your hand as you bled out on a straw-stuffed cot. Men had different dangers, but they were just as relentless. Farming accidents, infected wounds, bar fights, crusades gone wrong. Even a trip to the market could be fatal if you bumped into the wrong soldier or a tax collector with a hangover. Then there were the quieter killers. Plague could turn entire cities into silent graveyards overnight. Famine could starve entire regions for seasons. And if you were really unlucky, you might eat spoiled grain and spend your last hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls. As for funerals, you were lucky if anyone noticed you died. Bodies were buried quickly, often in shallow pits. Number? Embalming. No coffins. Just a hole, a prayer, and a hope that there was still room in the churchyard. So yes, life in medieval Europe was brutal, short, and constantly stalked by death in all its terrible forms. You didn't retire, you just stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's move to your final chapter, the death of the medieval dream. So, how's your day been? You woke up in filth, relieved yourself in a bucket, brushed your teeth with optimism, starved half the day, worked until your back screamed, scratched your way through flea-infested wool, dodged the plague, and nearly got executed for owning a squirrel. Welcome to a typical day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Think again. That romantic version, the gallant swordsman, noble ladies in towers, feasts in candlelit halls, fists, fantasy, a myth wrapped in fairy tales and polished by Hollywood. The reality, a world that was gritty, cruel, and completely unfair. Born poor, you stayed poor. Born rich, you had a better shot at survival, but still faced deadly soup and politically arranged marriages. Even in a castle, you'd be living in a freezing stone box filled with fleas and smoke. You might sip wine in 4 robes but also die from a splinter. So much for simpler times. Everything was harder. Everything hurt more. Chewing was dangerous. Childbirth was deadly. And if you did happen to think a thought or dream a dream, good luck. No mobility, no medicine, no Google. You lived, suffered, and died within 10 miles of your birthplace. And yet, people still laughed. They sang, they told stories, they fell in love, not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn like that. Even in darkness, they found light. So tonight, when you crawl into your clean bed with running water, antibiotics, and central heating, maybe whisper a thank you to the modern world and to the ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudalism, so you wouldn't have to. You've been watching History Nest. Stay curious. Her mother was still whispering in her ear, not for her daughter's sake, but on behalf of foreign powers. Even her own servants might have served another flag. In this world, alliances could turn into accusations overnight, but Catherine wasn't naive. She studied the court's games and played them in silence, weaving her own network in the shadows. She charmed military officers, befriended scholars, and built a reputation for restraint and grace, a striking contrast to her husband's childish outbursts and his disdain for Russian customs. Behind closed doors, Catherine immersed herself in the writings of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. To some, she appeared to be nothing more than a young consort, but inwardly, she was forming a vision not just for herself, but for Russia, vision grounded in reason, education, and national strength. There was only one obstacle: Peter. As long as he lived, Catherine remained a sidelined wife, tethered to a man utterly unfit to rule. So she waited, listened, and prepared. The Russian throne would not be inherited. It would have to be taken. In 1762, after nearly 20 years of patience and planning, her moment finally arrived. Empress Elizabeth was dead. Peter, now Tsar, Peter III, sat on the throne, but his reign began to unravel almost immediately. In just a matter of months, Peter alienated the church, insulted the nobility, and humiliated the military, all while openly praising Prussia, Russia's historic rival. He reversed beloved policies, mocked religious leaders, and even spoke of divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court, already wary of his foreign tendencies and erratic behavior, turned cold. The army, filled with generals loyal to Catherine, whispered in discontent. Even the Russian public, devout and patriotic, began to see Peter as a foreign puppet who held their culture in contempt. Catherine saw the pieces moving and struck. In July of that same year, while Peter was away at his summer residence, Catherine launched a bloodless coup. Backed by key military leaders, including her lover Gregory Orlov and his powerful brothers. She rode triumphantly through the streets of St. Petersburg in full regalia. She was proclaimed Empress Catherine II and quickly secured the support of the elite imperial guard. Peter, caught off guard and without allies, surrendered within days. He was placed under custody and soon after found dead under suspicious circumstances. The official report claimed a sudden illness. Unofficially, it was murder. Catherine was now empress not by lineage, not by marriage, but by sheer will and brilliance. It was without precedent. A foreign-born woman with no direct claim to the throne had seized it without shedding a drop of blood. But now came her greatest challenge, turning that bold seizure of power into a durable legacy. Would the Russian elite accept her? Could she keep the nobility close without losing her ideals? Would the empire itself hold? Catherine understood better than anyone that power won through intrigue could be lost just as quickly. She had to transform herself from conspirator to visionary, and thus began her most ambitious project, not just to reign over Russia, but to reimagine it. She could have ruled passively, content with the crown she had claimed, but Catherine had something far grander in mind. She wasn't just interested in military might or political dominance. She wanted to transform Russia intellectually. While Peter had idolized Frederick the Great and paraded around with toy soldiers, Catherine turned to the likes of Voltaire, Diderot, and the radical minds of the Enlightenment. She didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy, she embodied it. Catherine corresponded with Voltaire for over 15 years, offering both flattery and intellectual debate, while quietly defending her absolute rule. She invited Diderot to her court, and even purchased his entire library to support him. Behind palace doors, shepherded over law books, debated reform, and worked tirelessly to modernize the empire. Early in her reign, she launched an effort to codify Russian law. In 1767, she established the Legislative Commission, a sweeping initiative to rewrite the legal foundation of the nation. Her own nakaz or instruction was a radical political document. It called for equality before the law, condemned torture, and emphasized the ruler's duty to serve the people. For an empress in 18th century Russia, it was nothing short of revolutionary. But ideals rarely survive unscathed in a land so vast, feudal, and conservative. Russia's nobility had no desire to lose control over their serfs. Catherine understood this harsh reality. While she abolished certain forms of torture and expanded access to secular education, she also reassured the aristocracy by upholding their dominance over the peasantry. This was the tightrope Catherine walked. Publicly, she was the philosopher, queen. Privately, she remained a shrewd political survivor. Between the polished salons of Paris and the gritty power corridors of Moscow, she navigated a treacherous balance. Her dream was not to make Russia European, but to make it modern, on her own terms. And that meant reform with restraint, change with control, an iron will wrapped in silk. But Catherine's ambition wasn't confined within Russia's borders. She wanted to expand outward, to reshape the very map of Europe. Where Peter the Great had opened a symbolic window to the west, Catherine aimed to tear down the walls entirely. Under her leadership, Russia stretched further than ever before. She waged wars not only to secure her rule, but also to assert Russia's power on a continental scale. Her most defining military campaigns were fought against the Ottoman Empire throughout the 1760s and 1770s. These wars were more than territorial, they were ideological. Catherine positioned herself as the protector of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule and a defender of Eastern Europe's cultural soul. Commanders like Alexander Suvorov and Gregory Potemkin, her trusted ally and perhaps lover, led Russian forces to victory. Crimea was seized. The northern Black Sea coast came under Russian control. Warm water ports, long a dream of Russian rulers, were finally within grasp. These triumphs were not only military, they were symbolic. With each conquest, Catherine announced to the world, Russia was no longer Europe's backward cousin. It was now a force to be feared and respected. But she didn't stop there. Catherine turned west, toward the crumbling Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In a series of carefully negotiated partitions with Austria and Prussia, she oversaw the carving up of Poland. By the end of the third partition in 1795, Poland had been erased from the map, and Russia had absorbed vast lands and millions of new subjects. Catherine didn't just conquer with armies, she colonized with culture. She commissioned new cities, expanded trade routes, welcomed German settlers to farm Russian lands, from the frozen shores of the Baltic to the sunlit plains of the Black Sea. Her empire became a mosaic of peoples, ideas, and ambition. And through it all, Catherine remained the unwavering force at the heart of the Russian Empire, reading intelligence reports, issuing direct orders, and personally shaping the contours of her ever-growing realm. Critics often labeled her as power-hungry, even imperialistic. But to Catherine, expansion wasn't ambition, it was destiny. She believed that a ruler's greatness was measured not merely by their ideas, but by the reach of their borders. She didn't simply aim to govern Russia. She wanted to transform it into a civilized empire, feared by enemies, respected by rivals, and loyal to her alone. For all her brilliance and command, Catherine the Great was equally renowned for the mystique surrounding her private life. And no, not all of it was whispered about in candlelit libraries. Her personal affairs became one of the most gossiped about elements of her reign. She had lovers, not one or two, but a carefully selected parade of them, often younger, strikingly handsome, and occasionally politically astute. She didn't hide them. On the contrary, Catherine frequently rewarded them with noble titles, lavish estates, and lifetime pensions if they served her well. If not, they were quietly dismissed, sometimes with a polite thank you and a promotion. Among the most significant of these was Gregory Potemkin, a man as audacious as he was intelligent. Their relationship transcended romance, blending into partnership and political strategy. Some historians even speculate they married in secret. Together, they led military campaigns, launched colonization programs, and reimagined the southern territories of Russia. Potemkin was far more than a lover. He was, in many ways, her co-ruler, but Europe couldn't look away from the scandal. Whispers turned to pamphlets. Satire turned to slander. After her death, the rumors only grew more grotesque, the most infamous being a completely false and vile story involving a horse, fabricated by her enemies to degrade her legacy. But why such obsession? Simple. Catherine was a woman who wielded power unapologetically, and in a world where female rulers were expected to be saintly virgins or tragic figures, she refused to play any role but her own. She lived, loved, and ruled on her terms, and that made her dangerous. Ironically, while her enemies labeled her immoral, Catherine had a deeply philosophical view of love and sexuality. She believed that pleasure was natural, and that personal relationships need not compromise one's public responsibilities. She separated emotion from governance, a mastery few male rulers ever achieved. In truth, many of her romantic alliances were also political. She chose partners who were loyal, capable, and useful to the empire, and when their value faded, she let them go, often with a smile and a generous retirement. Far from weakening her reign, her love life became part of her strategy, a balance of passion and politics that made her both revered and feared. Yet even a monarch of her brilliance couldn't escape peril, and in 1773, it arrived in the form of a ragged Cossack, named Yemeniy, no ordinary rebel. Pugachev claimed to be Peter III, Catherine's late husband, miraculously returned to reclaim his stolen throne from the German usurper. It was absurd. Peter was long dead, but for Russia's oppressed lower classes, facts didn't matter. Hope did. Pugachev promised freedom, an end to serfdom, lighter taxes, and land for the people. His words ignited revolt across the Volga River region. Cossacks, peasants, and old believers flocked to his banner. In a nation where the nobility grew richer and the serfs poorer, his promises sounded like salvation. What followed was the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Towns were seized. Fortresses fell. Nobles were killed in their estates. For a harrowing moment, it seemed the empire itself might collapse. Catherine was shaken. This wasn't a foreign war she could end with cavalry and treaties. It was an uprising of her own people, but she did not flinch. She acted. Catherine deployed elite military forces to crush the rebellion with overwhelming strength. In 1774, Pugachev was captured, paraded in an iron cage, and eventually executed in Moscow, a chilling warning to all who might follow. Afterward, Catherine tightened her grip. Her one-sided dreams of ending serfdom faded into silence. She now depended more heavily on the nobility, granting them nearly total control over their serfs in exchange for loyalty. It was a turning point. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now prioritized order over philosophy. Reform became cautious. Surveillance intensified, and even the whisper of rebellion was hunted down. Pugachev lost his life, but he left behind a warning that haunted Catherine. Power built on deep inequality cannot stand forever. By the time Catherine the Great approached the twilight of her reign, she had ruled for more than 3 decades, longer than any female ruler in Russian history. From the moment she seized power, she shattered expectations, expanded borders, and redefined what it meant to be a woman on the throne. Under her leadership, Russia became a true European giant. The empire grew by more than 200,000 square miles, including Crimea, vast parts of Poland, and the Black Sea coast. These weren't random conquests. They were strategic expansions, securing warm water ports and strengthening trade routes. But her influence went beyond borders. Catherine left a profound cultural legacy. She helped establish the Hermitage Museum, collecting one of the most magnificent art troves in Europe. She corresponded with the Enlightenment's greatest thinkers, and turned her court into a beacon of refinement and intellect. She advanced education, founding schools for girls, promoting printing, and introducing smallpox inoculation to Russia, even receiving the vaccine herself, a bold act of scientific courage. Yet contradictions remained. While she admired Enlightenment ideals, she never liberated the serfs. In fact, she expanded serfdom deeper into Russian lands. Her reforms, though impressive, were often top-down, polishing the empire without transforming its core. Still, Catherine brought ambition and stability. She understood that true power isn't inherited, it's earned, protected, and wielded with precision. She ruled not by divine right, but through sheer will, strategic brilliance, and unrelenting effort. To some, she was a tyrant. To others, a visionary. But no one could deny her impact. When she died in 1796, Russia was richer, mightier, and more modern than it had been in centuries. She left behind not just an empire, but a legend. Catherine didn't merely reign. She ruled fiercely, intelligently, and unapologetically. And in doing so, she became not just an empress, but a myth. Yet beneath the grandeur, Catherine remained a woman navigating a man's world and reshaping it in her image. She was never Russian by birth. She took the crown through a coup. She ruled an empire skeptical of a woman's hand, and still, she prevailed. Catherine never settled for ceremonial power. She read endlessly, wrote fervently, and mastered statecraft. Her daily schedule was packed, reviewing reports, managing politics, drafting policy, and keeping rivals in check. She didn't sit on the throne, she worked it. And still, there was loneliness. Surrounded by nobles, lovers, and artists, she often wrote of how few people she truly trusted. Her son Paul, whom she distrusted, was kept away from the reins of power and grew into a man she feared would unravel her work. Her deepest partnership with Gregory Potemkin slowly faded into a profound friendship. His death in 1791 left a silent scar. Catherine curated her image with care. She understood the power of storytelling and used it as expertly as any monarch before her. She was the mother of Russia, the enlightened empress, the warrior queen, and patron of the arts, all at once. But behind the portraits and proclamations stood a woman, brilliant, determined, and aware of the fragility of power. And through it all, she forged her name into history. Only on History Nest, where legends live again. She endured rejection, betrayal, scandal, and rebellion, and still, she kept going. When she died in 1796, She left behind an empire forever changed, but she also left behind questions. Could she have done more to abolish serfdom? Were her enlightenment ideals compromised by politics? Was she, ultimately, more of a reformer, simply a ruler? History remembers her by the title she never claimed for herself, the Great. Not because she was flawless, kind, or just, but because she seized power and wielded it unapologetically in an era when women were expected to stay silent. She didn't just wear the crown. She redefined what it meant to deserve one. Deep in the humid jungles of Chiapas, southern Mexico, the ruins of Palenque still whisper tales from the ancient Maya world. Towering temples pierce the canopy, their eroded limestone, faces hiding secrets older than empires. And in 1994, one of those secrets finally revealed itself. A team of Mexican archaeologists, led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez, was surveying Temple 13, a modest pyramid next to the famed Temple of the Inscriptions, the burial place of King Pacal the Great. No one expected much from Temple XII, until they noticed something strange, a sealed, hidden chamber beneath its structure. Remarkably, it had never been looted. It was untouched, pristine. When the team broke through and descended into the chamber, they found a stone sarcophagus resting in stillness. The air inside was thick with the silence of centuries. As they lifted the lid, a red dust billowed upward, brilliant and shocking. The entire interior was coated in powdered cinnabar, a mercury-based compound sacred to the Maya, and lying within that crimson haze was the skeleton of a woman. She had been buried with immense care and reverence. Her bones were delicate, but mostly intact. Her skull still wore a jade funerary mask. Surrounding her were ceremonial offerings, necklaces, diadems, and ear spools, all crafted from jade and shell. Everything about her burial screamed royalty. And yet, there was no name, no glyphs, no inscriptions. It was one of the most elaborate female burials ever found in Mesoamerican, yet it was a mystery. Who was she? Why the cinnabar? Was she a queen, a priestess, perhaps even Pacal's wife? Researchers called her Thread Queen, and the name stayed. Even with modern forensic tools, her identity remains uncertain. All we know is that she lived in the 7th century, during Palenque's golden age. Unlike most Maya tombs, hers had been hidden, isolated, and left unmarked intentionally. This was not just a burial. It was a spiritual act. She was not meant to be remembered through written word, but through ritual, through color, through the mystery she left behind. The most haunting feature of her tomb wasn't the jade, or the silence, or even the hidden chamber. It was the red powder. A thick layer of powdered cinnabar coated everything. The sarcophagus, the walls, the offerings, and even her bones. It clung like blood to stone. To the Maya, this was no accident. Cinnabar, made from crushed mercury sulfide, was both sacred and dangerous. Its brilliant red hue symbolized blood, rebirth, and the vital energy that connected humans to the divine. Red wasn't just a color, it was spiritual. It meant sunrise, sacrifice, and life emerging from death. Covering the dead in cinnabar was a transformative ritual not to preserve the body forever, but to prepare the soul for its next journey. To the Maya, death was not an end, it was a transition, a cosmic passage into the underworld. And whoever the Red Queen was, she was being prepared, not for burial but for deification. But there's another layer to this story. Cinnabar is toxic. Prolonged exposure can cause mercury poisoning, hallucinations, tremors, even death. The Maya may not have known the chemical risks, but they understood its power. It was volatile, otherworldly. To bathe a body in cinnabar was to declare that this person was no ordinary mortal. At Palenque, only 2 individuals were buried in such a way: the mighty King Pacal and the Red Queen. That detail alone stirred intense speculation. Was she his wife? His mother? someone of equal divine status. Her skull had been placed upon a layer of jaguar pelta sacred symbol. Around her were bone needles, obsidian blades, and small jade figurine tokens of ritual and status. These weren't just grave goods. They were part of a sacred preparation, a ceremonial roadmap for her soul. Every element of the tomb told a story without words, a story of silent power cloaked in secrecy. She was not meant to cross into the underworld quietly. She was meant to do it in ceremony, drenched in the sacred color of sacrifice. Surrounding her crimson-washed remains was a world of ritual. Jade, shell, and obsidian glittered in the dim chamber, not as decoration, but as offerings. Jade necklaces draped over her chest and wrists, still gleaming after 1,300 years underground. To the Maya, jade symbolized life itself, the green of maize, the vitality of Thephorist, and the breath of the gods. Only the elite were buried with it. For the Red Queen, it marked her as someone of immense significance, perhaps even divinity. But one of the most haunting artifacts was the funerary mask. It wasn't golden or gaudy like those of Egypt. It was subtle, composed of dozens of tiny jade tiles, arranged to match the contours of her face. This mask served a sacred function, to preserve the soul, to protect the identity, and to present her as divine to the gods. Other objects were scattered nearby: obsidian blades, shell artifacts, and engraved bone pins. These could have been ritual tools or symbols of her role in life as a healer, priestess, or matriarch. Along the edges of the tomb were sealed ceramic vessels, likely filled with food, drink, or incense to nourish her on the dangerous journey through the Maya afterlife. Xibalba. The afterlife, for the Maya, was not peaceful. It was layered, chaotic, and filled with trials. These offerings weren't luxuries. They were provisions, spiritual tools, essential. And that is what makes the Red Queen's tomb so powerful. It wasn't extravagant. It was intentional. Every item is chosen for meaning. Every placement is sacred. A spiritual map for the soul. Through her burial, we glimpse how the Maya viewed death not as finality, but as transformation, as ascension. The Red Queen wasn't buried to be forgotten. She was being prepared to rise. And yet, for all the grandeur and ceremony, one thing was missing: her name. No inscription marked her sarcophagus. No glyphs adorned the chamber. Her identity was left unsaid. But why? From the moment her tomb was uncovered, scholars have tried to solve the mystery. The most compelling theory is that the Red Queen was Tzakbu Ajah, the noble wife of King Pakol. The great Sakbu was no ordinary consort. She was born into nobility and married into Palenque's ruling dynasty. Young, she bore several sons, one of whom would eventually rule land. She held ceremonial power alongside Pakol. If anyone could receive such a burial, it was her. Supporting this theory was geography. Her tomb lay just meters from Pakol, still deliberately close. Rulers in life, united in death. Then there's the cinnabar. Only two people in Palenque were buried in such a way: Pakol and her. Still, the mystery deepens. DNA testing was performed on both sets of remains in hopes of finding a genetic link. The results? Inconclusive. No direct maternal relationship. But that didn't rule out a spousal one. Marriage doesn't require shared blood. Some speculate she may have been Sak-Kuk, Pakol's mother, a queen regent who ruled before he came of age. Others suggest she was a high priestess, a royal ancestor, or a woman whose name simply didn't survive time's erosion, and perhaps the absence of her name was intentional. In Maya belief, the soul lived on, not through monuments, but through memory, through ritual, through symbol, through the sacred earth itself. And so, the Red Queen remains what she was always meant to be: a mystery, a woman of power, remembered not in script, but in silence. But in scarlet and in silence. To truly understand the Red Queen, we must first understand the world that shaped her, a world where Maya women, especially those of royal blood, wielded more influence than history often admits. In Maya civilization, politics was deeply rooted in family, and royal women were far from passive figures. They were diplomats, priestesses, and power brokers. They led rituals, commissioned temples, and safeguarded dynastic legacies. Their bloodlines were vital political tools used to forge alliances and solidify claims to the throne. Take Sac-Kekok, for instance, the mother of Kanich, Janob Pakal, also known as Pakal the Great. When the throne of Palenque was left empty, she didn't wait for a male heir to step in. She took the crown herself, ruling as queen regent until her son came of age. But she was more than a placeholder. She was a sovereign in her own right, issuing decrees and overseeing major construction projects. Without her, Pakal's rise might never have happened, and Sac-Kekok was not an exception. Across the Maya world, in cities like Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, inscriptions depict royal women performing major ceremonies, engaging in diplomacy, and even leading in times of war. They were carved into stele and painted into murals, adorned in elaborate headdresses and regal garments, often standing beside kings as equals or, in some cases, standing above them. Their names were etched into glyphs. Their power was unsurrendered until it was forgotten. When Spanish conquistadors arrived centuries later, they saw native women through a colonial lens, silent, submissive, invisible. But archaeology tells another story, one of complexity, where gender roles were fluid, negotiated, and spiritually charged. This context reframes the story of the Red Queen, though she may not have ruled in name. Her burial, sacred, opulent, and beside Pakal, reveals that she was a central pillar in the royal structure. Her jade death mask was no mere ornament. It symbolized power attained in life and protected in death. Her bloodline may have been the very glue that held Palenque's dynasty together. In Maya civilization, a queen wasn't just a consort. She was a guardian of sacred lineage, a voice in sacred ceremony, and a bridge between gods and men. The Red Queen may remain nameless to us, but in her world, she was never voiceless. She wasn't just buried with treasures, she was buried in architecture rich with purpose, infused with Maya cosmology, ritual meaning, and deliberate design. Her final resting place was inside Temple 13-1 of the smaller pyramids at the heart of Palenque, nestled beside the grand temple of the inscriptions where Pakal was laid to rest. In Maya architecture, nothing was accidental. Temples were positioned according to astrology, mythology, and royal legacy. Though Temple the 13th rises modestly beside its monumental neighbor, it guards a secret far more intimate, a sealed crypt, untouched by looters, and perfectly preserved. The tomb lies deep within the temple's core, accessible only by a steep, narrow staircase, almost like a descent into the underworld itself. The chamber is stark cut from stone and sealed for more than 1,130 years. No glyphs grace its walls, no murals tell her story. But perhaps that silence is itself a message. This was not a space for the living to interpret. It was a chamber for transformation. At its heart rests a limestone sarcophagus, an altar of stone, echoing Pakal's more famous tomb, while Pakal's coffin lid is a masterpiece of engraved cosmic symbolism. The Red Queen's is subdued, its focus turned inward, toward the body, the cinnabar, and the sacred ritual of death, and yet, meaning still whispers through its design. The tomb is aligned east to west, mirroring the sun's passage from life into death. The chamber, though small, carries immense spiritual weight. It was not just a tomb, it was a sanctuary, a space where death became transformation. For the Maya, death was not an end, but a threshold, a sacred crossing into the underworld known as Xibalba. For someone like the Red Queen, this journey was not only spiritual, it was also political, cosmological, and deeply ceremonial. Maya funeral rites were elaborate. They were choreographed acts of myth, meant to guide the soul through the trials of the afterlife. Xibalba was not a place of rest. It was a dark maze filled with rivers of blood, gods of death, and harrowing trials. Only those ritually prepared and properly buried could hope to emerge reborn. The Red Queen was prepared in every sense. Her body was wrapped in cinnabar, a sacred red pigment symbolizing blood and transformation. She was encased in stone, surrounded by ritual offerings. Bone needles and obsidian blades, found beside her, may represent self-sacrifice, perhaps rites she performed in life, or symbolic acts reenacted at her burial to empower her soul. Her jade death mask, carefully pieced together from tiny green tiles, wasn't simply decorative. In Maya belief, the face mirrored the soul. The mask may have preserved her identity, ensuring she would be recognized by the gods in the afterlife. Surrounding her were ceramic vessels, possibly once filled with chocolate, maize, water, or pulque, to nourish her spirit on the long journey. Other ritual items, stingray spines, shell trumpets, may have served as spiritual tools, tokens of communication with divine forces. For the Maya, burial was not a good bait, was a planting. Death was the seed, the tomb, the soil. From it would bloom rebirth, both cosmically and dynastically. Kings and queens were more than rulers. They were divine vessels, earthly incarnations of gods. In death, they returned to the stars. The Red Queen, entombed in red, laid within a temple, honored with sacred artifacts, was being prepared for cosmic renewal, not as a forgotten figure, but as a being woven into the sacred order of the universe. Her burial was not an epilogue, it was the prologue to her legend. Just steps from her tomb lies one of Mesoamerica's most celebrated graves, the final resting place of Kanich Janab Pakal, known as Pakal the Great. His burial, inside the Temple of the Inscriptions, is renowned for its monumental scale, its artistry, and its celestial symbolism. Yet what makes the Red Queen's resting place so profound is not only what was buried within, but also where it was found. Her sarcophagus was hidden inside Temple 13, directly adjacent to Pakal's mighty pyramid. In a city where temple placement reflected celestial order and dynastic meaning, this proximity was no accident. It was a declaration, a message carved in stone. Many scholars today believe the Red Queen was none other than Sakbu Ajaa, the wife of Pakal, the greater woman of noble blood, sacred lineage, and spiritual power. Though her name may have faded from public memory, her tomb, her mask, and her red-stained bones, they speak in her place. And now, through archaeology and careful study, her voice is being heard once more. This is History Nest, where forgotten queens rise again, and the past is never truly silent. She was Palenque's queen, his consort, his cosmic counterpart. Though her tomb bears no inscriptions, the parallels between her burial and his are unmistakable. Both were wrapped in cinnabar, both entombed within pyramids, both laid to rest with jade, and both honored with an almost sacred reverence. Their final rites echo each other, like verses from the same ancient hymn, as if they were two halves of a deeper, sacred narrative. Pal's sarcophagus famously shows him descending into the underworld tree, a vision of death, transformation, and rebirth. Her tomb, simpler and more austere, lacks this kind of iconography. Yet the symbolism is in their union. If Pal embodied the sun traveling through the underworld each night, then the Red Queen may have been the moon, the feminine force tracing her own celestial path across the darkened sky. Together, they formed a cosmic duality, king and queen, sun and moon, masculine and feminine, order and ritual. In Maya belief, rulership wasn't a solitary concept, it was relational. Balance in the heavens required balance on earth and in the court. By placing her beside Palenque's great ruler, the Maya weren't just preserving a marriage, they were preserving cosmic harmony. She wasn't behind him, She was beside him, not merely a consort, but an equal in death as in life. Their tombs speak a language of silence. Two beings, sealed in cinnabar and stone, bound not just by blood or ritual, but by destiny. One of history's most powerful silences, though her name has been lost to time, the Red Queen of Palenque endures not as a forgotten relic, but as one of the most mysterious and powerful women in ancient Mesoamerica. Her tomb, sealed for over 1,300 years, now whispers across centuries. With each discovery, her story only deepens. She remains a mystery, a queen without a name, a legend without a glyph, but her burial tells us everything. The care, the richness of the offerings, the crimson hue of her bones, they all speak of immense spiritual and political weight. This was not just the wife of a king. This was a woman of power in her own right, a woman of blood, lineage, and sacred duty. Today, she challenges the assumptions we carry. She reminds us that in the ancient Maya world, women did not stand silent. They led rituals, they ruled, they built dynasties. Palenque's kings may dominate the monuments, but the Red Queen is the one stirring today's imaginations. Her legacy is larger than the treasures she took to the underworld. It lives in the conversations she's ignited among archaeologists, artists, historians, and seekers. Every bead of jade, every brush of cinnabar, every curve of her tomb's architecture speaks with intent. This woman mattered, and that perhaps is the most profound part of her story. Not what we know, but what we still don't. She reminds us that history isn't a list of facts. It's a living mystery, a shared longing to reach through time and connect. That's her true legacy. She rests beneath layers of red, the color of life, of blood, of sacrifice and rebirth. Her face, once hidden behind a jade mask, now meets us through science, through art, and through awe. She may be nameless, but she is not voiceless. She may be mysterious, but she is not forgotten. The Red Queen may have ruled a kingdom in life, but in death, she rules something far more powerful, our imagination. Her story was sealed in stone, written in silence, and yet it speaks. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the vivid, windswept village of Cayocan, then a quiet place on the edge of Mexico City. Her childhood home, the Casa Azul, the blue house, overflowed with contradiction, beauty and pain, joy and suffering. One day, it would become a sanctuary, a battleground, and a museum to one of the most iconic artists the modern world has ever known. She was the third of 4 daughters, born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilda Calderon, a devout Catholic of both indigenous and Spanish descent. Her parents were opposites: Guillermo, a quiet intellectual, and Matilda, emotionally distant and deeply religious. From both, Frida inherited something essential: her father's reflective artistry and her mother's stubborn resilience. As a child, she was imaginative, daring, and unapologetically bold. She devoured books and challenged adults with questions they weren't ready to answer. But when she was just 6 years old, polio struck. It left her bedridden for months and permanently weakened her right leg. It would remain thinner and shorter for the rest of her life, something she concealed with long skirts but never allowed to define her. During this long isolation, Frida grew closer to her father. He encouraged her to remain strong physically and mentally, teaching her photography, sports, and how to think independently. While other girls dreamed of weddings and homemaking, Frida dreamt of scalpels and science. She longed to become a doctor. At 15, she was accepted into the National Preparatory School in Mexico City, one of only 35 girls among 2,000 students. There, she made her mark, not just with her intelligence but also with her irreverent wit, radical thinking, and unique aesthetic. She joined the Cachuchas, a group of rebellious intellectuals who debated literature, philosophy, and politics, even before tragedy etched itself into her bones. Frida was already forging her identity, sharp, unyielding, and utterly her own. She wasn't just growing up in Kyokan. She was preparing to transform herself. On September 17, 1925, Frida Kahlo's life split in two to the girl she had been and the woman she would become. That day, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias. They were laughing, teasing, and maybe even arguing. Frida never did anything halfway. Moments later, a streetcar collided with the bus, splintering it into chaos and silence. The crash was catastrophic. The steel tram crushed the wooden vehicle against a wall. Splinters of wood flew like shrapnel. Passengers were thrown. Frida's body was pierced by an iron handrail. It entered through her hip and exited through her pelvis. Her spine fractured in 3 places. Her leg was shattered, her foot dislocated, her collarbone, ribs, and shoulder all broken. She was only 18. A bystander covered her with a borrowed coat. Another noticed something strange. Her body shimmered. She had been carrying a pouch of gold powder. Upon impact, it burst open, covering her broken body in a ghostly glitter, like sacred ash. She was rushed to the Red Cross hospital. Dozens of surgeries followed. She lay encased in plaster, flat on her back, writhing in pain and trapped in silence. Her dreams of becoming a doctor faded with every passing day. But from that stillness, something stirred. Her father brought her brushes. Her mother suspended a mirror above her bed. A custom easel was mounted so she could paint while immobile. And there, in agony and isolation, Frida Kahlo began to paint, first out of boredom, then with furious obsession. Her first subject was her own reflection, because, at that time, she was all she had. But what emerged wasn't vanity, it was survival. The crash had broken her body, but it had also opened a strange new door, a portal into her own mind, her own limbs, and eventually, into the surreal language of pain and identity that would define her art. The girl who once dreamed of healing others had now begun healing herself. One brushstroke at a time, lying in a steel and plaster corset, fighting her own body with every breath, Frida Kahlo began to paint. What started as therapy soon became something else, a new language. A language that was deeply personal, brutally honest, and often hard to look at, which was exactly the point. Frida didn't paint pretty flowers or polite landscapes. She painted pain. Her pain, physical, emotional, existential. Her early subjects were self-portraits, not because she was vain, but as she once famously said, "I paint myself because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." She painted on tin, on wood, small in scale, but enormous in emotion. Inspired by Mexican retablos, folk devotional paintings, telling stories of pain and miracles, Frida turned that tradition inward. Her body became the canvas, her emotions, the altar. In one painting, she's impaled with nails like a modern-day martyr. In another, she floats tethered to a broken column in a desolate landscape, her shattered spine turned into metaphor. She painted herself bleeding, fractured, decapitated, and bare, but never passive, always watching. Her pain was not made digestible. She painted the raw, unsanitized truth with defiance, even humor. Each painting was a reclamation of her body, her suffering, and her identity as a woman in a world that tried to define her. But Frida wasn't just telling her story. She was inventing a new visual vocabulary, blending Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical illustration, and symbolic mythology. Her art became a dreamlike autopsy of her soul, framed by color, culture, and defiance. By the time she was able to walk again painfully, Frida Kahlo was no longer the girl who wanted to be a doctor. She was an artist, and her art was unlike anything the world had seen. She didn't just paint her pain, she made the world look at it, and in doing so, she turned suffering into a sacred, revolutionary act. In 1928, still recovering, still painting, and only 21 years old, Frida met the man who would shape the most profound and turbulent relationship of her life, Diego Rivera, 20 years her senior and already Mexico's most famous painter. Rivera was a giant both in physical stature and artistic presence, known for his sweeping murals of Mexican workers, revolutionaries, and indigenous people. He dominated the national art scene. Frida had admired his work from afar, but now she wanted his opinion of her own. She interrupted him at the Ministry of Education, holding her paintings under her arm, and asked directly, "Do I have talent?" Rivera looked and said, "Yes, and not just out of kindness." He saw in her something rare, an unfiltered voice, raw and vivid, full of pain and irony, beauty and rage. A relationship began, equal parts inspiration and devastation. Frida later said, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other was Diego." They married in 1929. 2 outsiders. It was an odd pairing. He was famous, promiscuous, and larger than life. She was sharp-witted, fierce-aligned, and already walking with a cane. Her parents called it a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Their union was passionate, but volatile. Rivera supported her art and championed her growth, but he also broke her heart, repeatedly, even sleeping with her sister, Cristina. Frida, in turn, took lovers of her own, both men and women, including rumored affairs with Leon Trotsky and Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, then remarried the following year on new terms. Frida would keep her home, her money, her name, and her autonomy. This second marriage was no fairy tale. It was a creative alliance, a bond forged in mutual respect and artistic fire. Despite the betrayals, Diego remained a constant presence. He wounded her, yes, but he also believed in her, as an artist, as a revolutionary, as a woman who was redefining what painting could be. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego to the US too, San Francisco, Detroit, and New York as he worked on large-scale mural commissions. While Diego confronted capitalism with brushstrokes, Frida encountered it in real-time American industrialism, its wealth, its contradictions, and its excess, and she was appalled. She was a proud Mexican nationalist, a communist, and a lover of indigenous culture. To her, the glittering displays of materialism felt soulless, especially in the midst of the Great Depression. In letters home, she mocked America's obsession with status and superficiality. She longed for Mexico, the grit, the chaos, the color. While Rivera painted murals for factories and institutions, Frida created small, fiercely intimate works. Her style solidified, surreal, emotionally potent. It was during this time that she created some of her most iconic self-portraits, not for vanity, but to survive. Her body wrecked by the accident, surgeries, and a heartbreaking miscarriage became her landscape. Her portraits revealed her, bleeding, fragmented, and exposed. And yet her face remained calm, composed, and unflinching. One painting, Henry Ford Hospital, shows her lying on a bloodied bed, surrounded by haunting symbols: a fetus, a cracked pelvis, surgical and a snail. It was raw, graphic, and honest, a canvas soaked in truth. When the couple returned to Mexico, they invited exiled revolutionary Leon Trotsky to live in their home. Frida dressed in vibrant Taiwanese dresses and wore flowers in her hair, not just as fashion, but as a political statement. Her art was never separate from her beliefs. Her identity, her ideology, and her body, they were one. While Diego painted revolutions in the streets, Frida painted their aftermath on skin and soul. She became not just a painter of pain, but a painter of resistance. By the late 1930s, back in Mexico, Frida Kahlo had transformed. She was no longer just Diego's wife. She was her own force. Her home, La Casa Azul in Cayocan, became a living museum of imagination: bright cobalt walls, Aztec idols in Vegarden, and parrots on the windowsill. Inside, incense burned, mariachi echoed from the streets, and Frida painted in a world of her own design. She surrounded herself with pre-Columbian artifacts, folk art, and revolutionary books. She wore bold indigenous clothing, adorned her hair with flowers, and infused every detail of her world with color, contradiction, and culture. This period exploded with creativity. She painted the two Fridas a haunting double silhouette, one dressed in European finery, her heart exposed and bleeding, the other in traditional Mexican dress, strong and grounded. It was her visual autobiography, a portrait of fractured love, dual identity, and the war between her roots and her wounds. In 1939, she exhibited in Paris. Artists like Picasso, Kandinsky, and André Breton praised her fiercely original vision, but Frida resisted their labels. When Breton called her a surrealist, she rejected the term. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said, "but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." She painted Mexico not the romantic postcard version, but the raw, breathing, aching country she loved. Her art pulsed with symbolism, skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She honored the indigenous soul of her homeland, while exposing its scars, past and present. Even as her artistic voice grew bolder, her health steadily declined. Surgery after surgery, infections, and chronic agony became part of her daily life. Still, she painted propped up in bed, her torso bound in corsets, her fingers clenched around a brush like a weapon. Frida had returned to Mexico not to recover, but to reclaim her power through paint, through politics, and through an unflinching embrace of her truest self. As the 1940s unfolded, her body continued to betray her. Her spine deteriorated. Her right leg was plagued with infections. In total, she would undergo more than 30 surgeries, often in brutal succession. For months at a time, she was bedridden, encased in plaster casts, or stretched by traction devices that pulled her bones apart. Yet, through all of it, she kept painting. Her canvases in those years were not just expressions, they were survival, rebellion, and release. Her art became darker, sharper, and more defiant. In the broken column, she paints herself split down the middle, her body pierced with nails, her spine replaced by a shattered ionic column. But her face is calm, her gaze unshaken. Pain was no longer just a subject as tight as her companion, her nemesis, her muse. Her political voice, too, grew louder. She rejoined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in protests, wrote blistering letters, and condemned imperialism and injustice. When she could no longer walk, she arrived at rallies in a wheelchair, her fists raised, her slogans fierce. In 1953, Frida Kahlo received her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a triumph long overdue. But her health was fragile. Doctors told her not to attend. So, she did what only Frida would do. She arrived in an ambulance, carried in on a stretcher, and laid in the center of the gallery on her hospital bed. Dressed in a traditional Taiwana dress, surrounded by her paintings, she welcomed guests with tequila, laughter, and that same unbreakable flame in her eyes. Her final works were both innocent and haunting. In Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, she painted herself in a steel corset, held by the hands of Marx, while symbols of oppression were cast away. Her last known piece was a still life of sliced watermelons, one piece, bearing the words, "Viva la vida," long live life. Even on death's doorstep, she remained joyous, political, and unbowed. Frida Kahlo's final paintings weren't merely self-portraits. They were revolutions and brushstrokes, created in agony, but always signed in blood and life. On July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo died in the same house where she had been born, La Casa Azul, in Cairo. The official cause was listed as a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her spoke of something deeper. She had been unwell, yes, but also weary, worn out by years of pain, surgeries, and the endless war with her own body. Just days earlier, she had attended a protest against the CIA-led coup in Guatemala week. In a wheelchair, but defiant, her fist still raised. Revolution was her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry was brief, sharp, and unforgettable. I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return. Her funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's most honored cultural stage. Draped in the red flag of the Communist Party, Frida's body lay in state as artists, family, friends, and revolutionaries came to pay their respects. Diego Rivera, inconsolable, called her the greatest love of his life, despite the betrayals that had nearly broken her. And then, something miraculous happened. Frida Kahlo refused to vanish. At first, her name lived only in quiet art circles. Her paintings were hard to define, too political for the surrealists, too strange for the formalists. But slowly, her story, her face, and her flame began to spread. During the 1970s and 80s, feminist scholars and activists rediscovered her and amplified her voice. She wasn't just a painter anymore. She became a symbol of pain, transformed into beauty, of feminism born from fury, of Mexican identity celebrated without apology, of queerness, disability, revolution, and unfiltered truth. Her face, the unibrow, the gaze, the crown of flowers, became iconography. Her home became a museum. Her diary became sacred. Her works now hang in the world's greatest galleries. Frida had spent much of her life in Diego's shadow, but in death, she stepped forward. She didn't just leave paintings. She left a mirror and dared us all to look into it, not with pity, not with fear, but with fire. Today, Frida Kahlo's face is everywhere, on t-shirts, murals, dolls, memes, posters, and altars. But what makes her legacy eternal isn't the fame, it's the truth behind the image. She didn't try to be perfect. She didn't fit the mold. She wasn't traditional, and she never tried to be. In a world obsessed with perfection, Frida gave us something better: realness. Raw, tangled, vibrant, wounded, angry, joyful, radical. Realness. She turned her difference, her disability, her queerness, her politics, her heritage into art that defied borders and generations. She became more than an artist. She became a global icon of defiance, feminism, cultural pride, and creative rebellion. For queer communities, she remains a fierce bisexual icon who lived out loud when silence was enforced. For women, she's proof that power doesn't ask permission. For disabled artists, she's evidence that pain can be painted and still burn with beauty. And for Mexico, she is a beloved daughter, folkloric, fiery, and forever woven into its soul. Her works, once dismissed, are now among the most treasured in art history. The two Fridas, self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird, and the broken column, these are not just paintings. They are sacred spaces for anyone who has ever suffered and sought to transform that suffering into meaning. She lived in the margin, sand turned them into a stage. A communist draped in gold, a betrayed woman who still loved, a shattered body housing an unbreakable soul. And through it all, she painted not only in color, but in conviction. Frida Kahlo never set out to be a symbol. She only told the truth of who she was. And in doing so, she told the truth for millions more who had never seen themselves reflected in art. This is History Nestin. This is how Frida Kahlo became immortal. If stories of courage, pain, and raw beauty move youth, then don't just watch history. Live it with us. Subscribe to History Nest for more untold journeys that shaped the world. One brushstroke, one revolution, one soul at a time.